Welcome to today's episode of the podcast where we discuss the most recent installment of a different series every show. In similar fashion to Jon Stewart returning to anchor The Daily Show, Andrew Lincoln is back after a multi-year absence to anchor the Walking Dead franchise. The Ones Who Live aired its first episode titled Years, Sunday, February 25th. The pilot explores where Rick has been and who he has become since we saw him last. What was your expectation heading into this?
It was the one I was most excited for.
Same.
Out of all the spin-offs that they announced.
He grounds the series. Or as Screen Rant says, he is the backbone of the series.
And I was thinking as long as it was able to entertain me, then I would probably give it a passing grade.
Oh,
However,
shit.
I did not expect it to be as good as it was.
Oh, you liked it?
I ended up loving this pilot.
Okay.
I thought that it was way better than any of the other spin-offs.
Let's go through the spin-offs and the original real quick.
Yes.
IMDb scores 8.1 for the original.
The original used to have an 8.7, I think, after season 4, and then just continually fell.
7.6 for Daryl. Did you ever finish that series?
I watched a couple more episodes. It was very slow moving.
Did he stay in France? Or was he like moving all around
From what I
Europe?
saw, he was still in France.
Okay, Dead City.
Dead City was awful. I remember giving it like a 4 out of 10 or something.
I think that's the one that takes the most place in the future. So this one even though it feels like it's moving the plot along further than any other Walking Dead series, actually Maggie and Negan are. And that has a 6.8, 5.9 for Tales of the Walking Dead.
Tales of the Walking Dead, I only ever saw that one episode.
I think most of those took place like near when the outbreak occurred in 2010. And then The World Beyond, which is most related to this show, however, has the furthest IMDb rating away from the show.
Like a 4
It has a
point
4.5,
right?
but it does deal with the CRM. And so if you've seen that show, you are better off like knowing the particulars about what the situation is like, where Rick has been placed. He's in Philadelphia
What
now.
about Fear the Walking Dead?
Fear of the Walking... Did I not say Fear of the Walking Dead? No. That has a 6.8. Let me go through them again. 8.1 for the original, 7.6 for Daryl, 7.2 for Dead City, 6.8 for Fear of the Walking Dead, 5.9 for Tales of the Walking Dead, 4.5 for World Beyond. And now this... Do you have any idea what it has?
I don't know.
It has a 9.1.
A 9.1?
Yes. However, the Rotten Tomatoes score is much different, and so is the Metacritic score. So there is a kind of a fluctuation of opinions right now. We'll get into that, but my expectation for this series has changed a lot over the years. First, I thought it was going to be like the pilot, where Rick was off on his own in a new place. There were going to be new adventures, new people. He was going to get a restart, kind of.
Right.
And that was really appealing because my favorite episode of The Walking Dead, like a lot of people's, is the pilot.
Days Gone By?
Yes, and no knock to the first few seasons, but I always thought that like it was best when he was the only one and everything around him was like chaos. And then over the years in The Walking Dead, it seemed like there was such a family, a love, a trust built up that the characters got such plot armor that yes, you would still kill off Carl and surprise people, but it never felt the same as when in those first few episodes he was kind of like anything could happen.
And I think that's why I like the pilot so much, because it was a return to form.
Yeah, the pilot of this?
Yes.
Yes. So then they introduced that Michonne was coming back, and do you remember when Michonne and Rick first hooked up in the TV show?
I think it was like the middle of season 6, right?
Yeah, and my interpretation of that is like I didn't care. Like the relationships were the last thing I cared about in the series, and that's probably why I started turning it off after a while. Like you have the fan base who loves the Rick and Michonne storyline. You have the fan base who does not like it, and then you have people like me who just could go either way.
I'm in that camp too.
I did not mind that she was going to be like the second co-star in this, and she's actually one of the people who have created it, along with Scott Gimple and Andrew Lincoln. They all have creative credit over this series.
So all 3 of them.
Yes.
Okay.
It started off in season 4 and onward, where Scott M. Gimple and Lincoln had this idea that maybe he would go off and do his own little storyline. This, I think, was also the time where he started floated the idea that he might take a break from the show.
All the way back in season 4.
But then in season 8, they thought maybe we should just kill you off. You know? But then they went a different direction. Season 9, episode 5, he leaves the show November 2018, 2019, July. That's when it's announced at Comic-Con that Universal is going to create 1 to 3 films based on Rick.
Right.
Do its own little thing. Then the Fire Nation attacked. Pandemic happened. There was pandemonium, and everything got shot into development hell. Finally, what came out was a bunch of different series of The Walking Dead. We've got the Daryl, we've got World Beyond. Now we have this with The Ones Who Live.
It seems like all the spin-offs, aside this one, because again, it has Rick here, just came out like 5 years too late. Like The Walking Dead hype had already kind of been killed, I would say, around maybe 2018, 2019, really around like season 7 and 8.
Yeah, so you're saying it outlived its welcome.
Yes.
I think what was strange about that is because they did the time jumps after season 9, right? Season 9, episode 5, that's when suddenly Judith was old, and there was really no reason to keep it. I guess the first 8 seasons were only 4 years in real time.
Mm-hmm.
Does that make sense? And so it's weird seeing this pilot here take place over 8 years or something like that.
I think it was 5 years.
Well, no, he got so in the show's timeline, it was 2010 when the outbreak happened or something. 2014 when in season 9 he was whisked away, abducted by the CRM, and then he spends a few years trying to escape, and then we see 5 more years happen, and by the end it's 2024 there. So I think in total it's close to 10 years that we've watched in one episode after we've only watched 4 years in the full 8 seasons of him. Does that make sense?
To think that Carl died in 2013 is such a weird thought.
It's also weird when you think of how obsessed he is with Michonne and getting back to her when really he only knew her for 2 years. He doesn't even think about Lori or Carl or even Judith for that time period when he's having all those dreams. He's writing letters to Michonne. He is in love with Michonne. But get to the plot of this episode. How would you synopsisize it?
So 5 years post-bridge incident, Rick sacrifices his ham to try...
Post-bridge incident being the explosion that happened where he goes tumbling, everybody thinks he's dead, and then the helicopter Jadis calls, picks him up because he's
Did we see whatever happened to Jadis? Because she's not in this episode at all.
Well, she'll be in the show. She's just not in this first.
Yeah. All right, yeah. So he sacrifices his hand. He's trying to get out of CRM captivity, but it ends up not going to plan.
We're led to believe that they took him in, they fixed him up, and then they said, you can't leave because this whole society of hundreds of thousands of people living in Philly, we just don't tell anybody about this, and the only way that we can keep quiet about it for the rest of the world is just not letting people leave. Regardless, he tries to escape multiple times, and then finally they have him hooked up to that wire, and that's where you're saying they take out his hand, right?
Yes, and that happened in issue 28 of the Walking Dead comic. That was so far back, that was when the governor was the main villain. Yeah. And so I think that everyone had kind of been waiting for that moment throughout the Walking Dead, and then we never got it in the series.
They did talk about that.
The closest we ever got was in the season 7 premiere when Rick was about to cut off Carl's hand because of Negan.
Same expression.
Rick even says it should be me.
Yes.
But it never happened.
And if you notice, and you slow it down for this episode, right before he cuts off his hand, he says, like father, like son. And then he just chops it right off.
Well, he did it in one fell swoop. It only took once, it seemed like, and then he was able to get his hand off. I thought that we were going to get a gruesome scene where it took him a couple whacks.
He heated it up so that it would go right through. People were pissed off, though, that he didn't try to cut the metal wire right next to it first.
Huh, probably would have been smarter. I just was glad that they finally had him lose his hand.
So he loses his hand in the first scene, then he gets a wicked, Wolverine type hand.
Yeah, so what happened was actually when he wakes up in the hospital bed about 10 minutes later, and he has 10 minutes in the show later, and he has the bandage over his hand, that is straight out of the comic, issue 28. Because we never see him lose his hand in the comic. He just wakes up, and he realizes that his hand is gone when he's in a hospital bed with a bandage over it.
Interesting.
So I was like, oh, that's a cool reference as well. And then he gets this Jaime Lannister mixed with almost Ash vs. the Evil Dead, although it's not a chainsaw, it's a knife hand. I guess 20 minutes in, it was really cool. I like that.
He only gets that though when he joins up with the CRM army.
So Okafor, who I guess he's like a villain, but not really a villain. Like I guess a villain you can understand.
Do you remember in The Walking Dead they always have the sage advice giving mentor type person to Rick? First it was Morgan, and then Herschel, and then Morgan again. And then sometimes it's Shane, sometimes it's Carl. They mix it up all throughout. Okafor was definitely playing that character here. And he was supposed to be the guy. And it wasn't until the last scene where, do you want to say what happens to him?
Well, yeah, he ends up dying because he
gets shot down in a helicopter.
Well, it was the strangest weapon because he gets like an arrow in the chest and then that arrow explodes and blood goes everywhere. It was like a grenade
dart almost. Yeah. But whoever shot that had eagle eye. And it was funny because all throughout we've been talking about what's her name? The person that he meets.
Thorn.
Yes, yeah, Thorn, but she says that she has such good shooting abilities that I was wondering if maybe she was trying to take down him, or because Rick wasn't supposed to be flying the helicopter, they make mention of that at the beginning of the scene where they say, thanks for flying it for me, right? And so Rick gets to fly the helicopter that we've been seeing all throughout The Walking Dead, which was kind of cool. But I thought maybe they were trying to kill Rick. But then when they crash, and then it ends up being Michonne who's there.
Well, there's like
off.
rockets going off also.
Yes, we're jumping so far ahead. I'm sorry for that. But yeah, so trailing it back just a bit, he joins the army of the CRM, but with the sole reason of wanting to escape still and realizing the only way to do so would be to rise up the ranks, right?
Yes, and he gets very close in the middle of the episode to actually escaping, so much so that he is about to go down a sewer until he sees a little girl is about to get eaten by zombies.
Yes, his humanitarian part of him takes control. However, I don't think he was going to escape because, like you said, Thorne had eyes on him the whole time, and she was about to shoot him if he had tried to. He just wasn't aware of that.
And also Esteban, played by Frankie Quinones from This Fool. I was really glad to see him here. Apparently is Rick's only friend that he's made while he's been at the CRM this whole time.
But I think we should stick to the main story here. So he joins the CRM. And then Okafor brings Thorne and Rick together and says, hey, you guys aren't necessarily supposed to be here. You are type A, or not in the same way of finicky and definitely making sure that everything is documented and stuff. Not that type of type A, but type A where your personality is that people will follow you. You're not a follower, so you should have been eliminated. However, because I want to change this place from the inside out, I'm speaking on your behalf and letting you rise up the ranks. So over the course of the years, Okafor and Rick become sort of friends and allies, and Rick is supposed to be leading this mission of the CRM where they're extending their grip on the world and so that more people can live within their boundaries and be safe of the zombies, right?
Yes.
And at the same time, you have Terry O'Quinn's character, right? Bean or something?
General Beale.
Beale. Okay. So Beale, he is sort of more traditional in the fact that he doesn't like Okafor's plan, but he's willing to go along with it for the time being. We're not really led to believe that CRM is totally good or totally bad, but that they do need to be changed.
Yes, and that's, again, Okafor, that's why he recruited Rick.
By the end of the episode, Rick has done a full 180 from wanting to escape to saying, I'm here to fight for this side of things, and then his plane is, or his helicopter is shot down, and he finally gets to meet Michonne. So
well, I think the important part to mention is right before he tells Okafor that he's going to be part of the CRM and join the plan, he talks about his dad. And I know that he's talked about his mom before in the Walking Dead series, but I don't think we've ever heard him talk about his dad.
Or that he's been part of a farm.
Farm. Obviously, season 2, that was a reference to that. This episode was full.
But don't you think when he
was
on the farm in season 2, he would have brought up the fact that I was raised on one of these, I know the first thing about farms, or I know a bunch of stuff. What were your first impressions once he ran into Michonne at the very end there? You saw she was killing all the people from the helicopter who survived, and then she got to him, and she wasn't looking at anybody else's face. She just happened to pull his mask off.
That was strange because she just kills the 2 other people without pulling their masks off.
Either one of them could have been Rick.
And this one suddenly she pulled off. I'm actually a little bit scared about the potential for this show because the pacing for it, the zombies were a lot cooler than they were before. I like that there was no villain around.
Why are the zombies more cool?
Because especially at the beginning zombies,
you thought the special effects have gotten
better?
With
the fire that they had in the middle of their bodies.
I thought it was wicked awesome when he cut off his hand and then he used his stump. He what's the word? He cauterized the wound by just sticking it right into the guts of a burning zombie.
I knew that was coming, but that was also cool to see. And just I was really enjoying it, but I don't know now that Michonne has shown up because it's that was basically Rick's goal throughout. I thought that was going to be the whole season, and I thought that Michonne was just going to be shown in those dream intercuts. She's actually in the show now, and so I don't really know what the point or where the story is supposed to be heading.
Especially since it's billed as a love story.
Yes.
Rick Grimes and Michonne attempt to find each other, which they do, and find out who they are now because they've all changed.
I'm wondering, are we going to get any other characters? Because this is a miniseries, I believe, which I also have listed as a con because with how good this pilot is, I know that Andrew Lincoln wanted to kind of be off The Walking Dead and spend time, I think, with his kids was the reasoning, but really they could do a 5 to 6 episode thing per season, and I think this show would be just fine.
Scott M. Gimple has left the door open in case it's very well liked, and it seems like there are a lot of people who are watching this. I came into it mostly because Rick was back. I do think he still embodies the show, and so there's a certain character or element that he brings to it where it's like The Walking Dead will follow him more than any other play.
And I'm glad that this episode completely followed Rick. He's in every single scene. Sure. And do you want to talk about some of the references? Did you catch any? Because I have a whole list here.
I do have references. I do have first impressions. They kind of fall under the same banner. This does not bode well for the small but adamant base of Lori fans out there who are hoping that she might make a return after all these years. You know?
It really does just seem like after she died,
yes.
and after season 3,
after that PTSD, he had some serious PTSD.
There's been no mention of her, and Rick has just kind of been able to completely forget about her.
Yeah, same with Carl at this point. It also played out like a bunch of video game clips that were mashed together, like Arkham Knight, whatever the Batman thing, where they
talking about
made a film out of it. It felt like every scene introduced people. They said, "I am this person. This is my motive. This is who you are." Like that. It was very exposition-y, very narrative. Like you had narration going on in the background. But that's
the part of things I liked about it. It was character-driven.
I'm not saying it was terrible. I'm just saying like it had to move at this pace and it had to do this in order to do that. The man is also obsessed with food. I don't know if you've noticed this, but in all his backflashes, all the serious backflashes, in this one it was pizza.
It's pizza, yeah.
In the one with Shane, it was fries. And we've always thought in season 6, season 7, when Glenn was killed off, famously, that there was this scene where Maggie's crying, and then we see a flash of a table where Glenn is at the end of it, and they're having a feast. But the thing is, I think that's actually Rick who's having that, because the next scene you see is Rick in his car crying. So I think it wasn't Maggie's flash, but his, and he's just constantly concentrating on food.
No, are
which
you
makes
sure?
sense because he's in an apocalypse.
Are you sure that it was Maggie that they showed? Because if I remember correctly, I think the season 7 premiere was Rick having that flashback.
That just goes to my point, though. So he always thinks about food. It makes sense, again, because he's in an apocalypse. And when he was on that phone in season 2, I think he was calling for takeout.
You're talking about season 3.
Season 3?
Yeah.
Was it season 3? Okay, that's when they were on the prison. We got answers to the A's, the B's, and the T-Dogs.
Yep.
We got no Jadis, which was a little bit of a surprise. A lot of Forrest Gump scenes in his head. Michonne, I think, is a lot less cool without her zombie pair behind her. So, but I think it would have been, it was a missed opportunity not to have her appear with a couple of tiny dogs that she then named Mike and Terry, because then those could have been her pets. Or at the end, when she does show up in real life, it would have been cool if she had them back, like a bunch more, just like 8, like those dog walkers who decide to have way too many chains. Like she just had 8 dogs, or like, you know, people.
that would have been awful.
It would have been hilarious, don't you think? Like she's just grown over the course, become more Michonne over time. But yes, the connections, the references. Let's get into some of those.
So obviously, like we said, we had the hand, but then there was the then versus now. So they start off saying it's 5 years post bridge incident, but then at the very end of the episode, the words now show up on screen. And if you remember the season 5 premiere when they were at Terminus, they did the same exact thing where they showed how Terminus kind of turned into the bad place that it was because some savages came and they had the words then and then now come across on screen. So there was that.
The savages were also very hungry, the ones at Terminus.
Yes.
Just for a different type of food. I want to draw my own connection here.
Yeah,
too.
go ahead.
Esteban, when he's talking to Rick, he exposits, you didn't speak at all to me for the first however many years, right?
Right.
And then one day that changed. However, if you remember Michonne, when she made it to the governor's place, when Andrea took her there, Woodbury, she didn't speak either. So that's complete.
Yes.
That's a complete connection between the two of them. Also, I'll throw in another one. When Glenn said, "I'll find you," that's like his last line, right? That's exactly what Rick has been doing the entire time. In fact, you could like consolidate every point that he was making in his diary entries to "I will find you, Michonne," and then he did.
Also, when he's in his closest attempt to actually escaping, he pulls out the grenade. I felt like that was a direct reference to the season 1 finale when they used the grenade to get out of the CDC or wherever it was they were trying to get to. The prison killing zombies with poles that they do in the first 10 minutes.
Those are weird poles.
Yeah, it reminded me a lot of when they would kill zombies back at the prison. And also, I think this was a direct
connection.
That's
where Michonne first showed up, right?
Right, yes. That's where Rick is able to see her. at the very end of the episode. But and then also right after that, when Rick kind of slides down and he is covered in blood and he's just kind of looking bewildered, that was the season 4 finale scene, or the first scene.
I highly doubt that that's a connection. That's just Rick.
I think you
Rick
need
form.
to. I think if you don't see that, you need to rewatch it, because it was the exact same shots that they were using. He looked exactly the same.
I'm saying he only looks that way now. It's weirder to see him clean than it is to see him covered in blood. You know, so that's why I'm saying it was more of a reference to his earlier days when they showed him clean cut in the dream sequences.
He looked exactly the same after he bit Daryl's group and bit the neck out of that one guy. Or when he turned and
he was like, "These guys don't know who they're fucking with." Like all that stuff. Wasn't he bloody for that too?
I think so.
Chopping his arm off. This is the same way that we talked about with Carl, but it also brings us back to Merle. And so now him and Daryl, he really is like Daryl's brother. Because you know how Daryl's always like my brother.
Right.
Like, yeah,
yes,
now he really
course.
is. Now they're matching. And then also the diaries and letters that Rick kept writing reminded me a lot of Carl in his last days.
Right, of course.
Got really obsessive with that.
I think season 8, episode 9, if I remember correctly.
Yeah, his PTSD is very strange, though, because his dreams are left mostly unaffected of, like, those, like, these terrible things that wake people up in a sweat. Mm-hmm. Instead, he's having these fanciful visions of, like, hanging out with Michonne. It's very much unlike The Punisher, where Laurie is just omitted. Like, you know, the people he's lost are omitted. No Bridge, no Carl, no Laurie, no Governor, no Negan, no Shane, no Judith in any of those dream sequences.
Just talking about the Governor really fast. Season 3, again, that was kind of the first human villain that they had. And I know I already mentioned this, but there was no villain, and I like that. I like that they weren't facing people, because when they faced people, it seemed like they just kept on having, let's get the Governor, now let's get Negan. There always had to be one big bad person, and I'm glad that Okafor didn't really fit that. He was someone different. This show was just a lot different than the spinoffs original.
So it sounds like you want to get into the pros then.
Yes.
All right, so jump into those.
So again, the zombies, they looked way better. They were so cool looking, and they were the actual villains if you wanted to pick that.
It's back to being The Walking Dead.
Yes, actually. And then again, the character driven. I really liked Pearl Thorne. One of the problems with The Walking Dead, I felt like, was during kind of the back half, maybe like season 6 through 11, is every single character had a monologue, and those monologues would get so boring after a while. But here, when Okafor or Pearl or even Esteban were on their monologues and they were talking, it seemed like they were actually giving character to what they were saying. They were able to make the dialogue more interesting.
Sure.
Before, and it seemed like with The Walking Dead, they were always just trying to pad the time with like close-ups. This, it knew what you wanted. We wanted to follow Rick, and I thought that the pacing worked out really well.
So I agree with you that introducing the characters was cool. I do think that it was a very predictable end to Okafor. I do think that Terry O'Quinn is going to become a bigger villain, and it was cool to see him. Frankie Quinones, I don't think that we're going to see very much of him later on. Esteban, I think, was sort of a one-off.
He served his purpose. Yeah.
He was funny, and he survived. I was more surprised that he had survived up until then, because he had become a consignee, which is what you need to become before you end up, after 5 years, 6 years of service, you're able to go into the regular town state, right?
Yep.
So I think there was a time period for which he actually had to survive out in the wild, and I'm trying to understand how that guy made it, you know? Like in any group, how he would be, because he would have gotten killed off in season 1.
One of my nitpicks, though, was actually Esteban's loyalty, because Rick has not talked to anyone, and I know that Esteban kind of talks about how he became friends.
Remember, the first 8 seasons, 4 years. This, we saw 10 years, basically. So even though we only got like 3 scenes with him and Esteban, or maybe even 2, that relationship was much more like longer lasting than anything he had before that.
Esteban was giving him like ways to escape, was actually helping him and giving him information.
Esteban knew Rick longer than Daryl ever knew Rick. Almost
That's
twice.
a weird way to put it.
Yes.
Yeah.
So, of course, they're going to be closer than it led on. The helicopter crash at the end, I think I need to highlight as one of the best scenes, because it got super violent super quickly. Things could have happened in any different direction. Besides Okafor dying, I thought it was unpredictable. I thought Michonne showing up in a hockey mask and a trench coat looked a lot less intimidating than, again, her little zombie friends.
Yep.
But let's jump into the cons if you don't mind, unless you have any more pros.
No, I thought that for my first con, there was too many scenes of Rick wanting to die. I really did not like how that Okafor Rick fight scene ended, where he just put the gun to his head and he was like, "Kill me."
He did the Breaking Bad.
Even in the first scene, he's holding like up a glass shard to his neck and he's like cutting himself. I was just like, I get it. Rick wants to die. Again, it's a nitpick because I feel like that's kind of what all my cons are. But I thought that there was just too many scenes of that.
I think that the exposition needs to be pointed out as a con. Too many people defining the setting for him, Rick defining the setting for us, defining themselves, especially when What's-Her-Face showed up. And Pearl was she's like, I love this one person and they got destroyed from me, or they got taken from me. And then I tried to kill him. And it's like, you're just laying out plot points for us. Yeah. The pacing of the second half felt a little bit like it went from double time to we're going to slow it down for you.
So you actually didn't like the back half? Because I thought pacing throughout the full hour was just good.
Yeah. I stopped making sense of some of the storyline. Like, my main thing is, okay, so the CRM, I'm not sold that it sucks. Like, Okafor's big deal is that they need to change it. But we never witness, especially if we haven't seen The World Beyond, anything that really gives us that point of view. Yeah. You know, I mean, it sounds like things are pretty great inside, and if you have 100,000 people and you're able to keep them alive and you're not running a Negan society, then why do we need to destroy it? At a certain point, with all these places that they've gone to, and there's been a lot of corruption in each one of them, this feels the most like concrete. So yes. I guess it makes sense why Rick wants to be a part of it as opposed to destroying it. The other thing is the dream sequences. They felt a little long in tooth. At the end, he just ran into Michonne anyways. Mm-hmm. So I don't know why we necessarily had to see all of them.
It probably would have worked better had those just been taken out of the show, because then it was like, oh, there's Michonne the first time we would have seen her.
Yeah, Esteban. No, I understand why they did it, because with his narration constantly pining for her, it made like it extra like strong by having him dream about her too. Esteban being the one who had to point out to Rick that he could escape if he rose up the ranks kind of felt dumb, because they were sitting there together and he's like, why don't you take this position? You know, if you do it, you probably just, you know, go off on some random mission and just never come back. And it took that for Rick to get the point. And then one of the lines that Rick says at the very beginning is, the first time I tried, the army didn't know what to do with me because no one ever tries to escape. No one wants to. And then they immediately show us Pearl, who is someone who wants to escape. And then they also, like, you would have people wanting to leave, right?
Mm-hmm, yeah.
Eventually.
Yes.
That would just be a problem. So the idea that they didn't know how to deal with him and that they didn't just kill him led me to believe, oh, this is just plot armor.
I think every single place that they've shown, whether it be Woodbury or whether it be the Kingdom, there's always been at least one person who has wanted to leave. So I agree with you on that. Also, Pearl Thorne, she says, even to Rick, I think it's the word want that's so misleading in the wanting to leave, because, she throws something at him, and the first thing she says to him is, thank you, because you showed me that there's no point in trying to escape, or something like that.
They could have just changed the line to say, the army didn't know what to do with me because I kept on getting supported by one of their sergeants who was refusing to let them kill me. I feel like Rick would have died if not for Okafor. They kind of drilled in that point several times, but I didn't understand why Okafor necessarily thought that Rick was going to be some savior. Mm-hmm. Because even now, it seems like when he's run into Michonne, he's going to be much more into trying to rekindle that relationship with her rather than trying to keep the CRM alive. Like, the CRM's going to survive with or without Rick.
Yes.
It is so big at this point. It feels like Terry O'Quinn really doesn't have to be the enemy here. He could just be like, go on your way. The other strange thing is that Maggie and Negan's series being in New York, right? That's where they take place. It feels like if Rick had really done something serious with the CRM and made it public to everybody so that that they would have been talking about that in Maggie and Negan's series.
Yeah, but I think also they're trying to keep Rick's fate, or at least at that time they were trying to keep Rick's fate kind of sealed. Just that we knew he was alive and that they weren't trying to kind of draw any connection to it.
What are you going to give this episode?
I'm going to give it an 8.5 out of 10. If for no other reason season that I felt that just the zombie kills were a lot better. Do you remember the first few seasons of The Walking Dead with the zombies? One of my favorite zombie kills was when Maggie and Glenn go to the pharmacy in season 2, and then Glenn hits a zombie with like a wooden plank, and then half the zombie's head goes flinging one way and then flings back, and it's still alive. Mm-hmm. And then like by season 6, it was just a simple knife in the eye, and that was it. But yes, overall, I'm going to continue watching the series. It's only like 5 more episodes, and I think a 9.1 is pretty high.
9.1 on IMDb.
8.5 for me.
89% on Rotten Tomatoes. AV Club, Roger Ebert, Collider, and Decider did not like it. 59 on Metacritic.
59 on Metacritic.
Yeah, it's got a strange diversification of opinion, but a 9.1 on IMDb is, I can understand why you want to watch the rest of the series. I'm giving it a 6.5. That's a
wow.
watch. It's not like the biggest pull for me. I have other series that I'm going to get to definitely first, and but it might get better. I do see how it could. It's just that I wouldn't be surprised if it kind of treaded water now that it's given us this big time jump. Because unlike the Walking Dead series, which did the time jumps but didn't show us the in-betweens when they did those time jumps, this it feels like it finally showed us the in-betweens of that time jump. And now that we're at this next place, it may turn back into the Walking Dead.
I will admit that, the potential is actually a con, which for most shows it's a pro, but it's a con for me because it's like, I am kind of worried now that Michonne is in the mix and that Rick has found her, like that it's just going to turn into kind of the love story that you were talking about.
Yeah, there's a lot of people love to see the two lovebirds like away from each other, like kept apart for some reason, because it's that tension, that dramatic. Maybe they're with someone else, or maybe they're literally away from each other. But once they're together, it's very hard to keep the story moving at a good rate, and especially for a zombie type show, it kind of turns into a muddled mess. That said, Scott M. Gimple has impressed before, so we'll see. Thanks for listening. We'll see you on the next episode. Hope you enjoyed this one. Bye.
Bye.